Thank you so much. Do you all hear me? Yes? Wonderful. Okay, I first want to thank Alvin and Gunther for having me and having everyone. And I want to thank everyone here at this conference for devoting your lives, both your professional and personal lives, to combating anti-Semitism. It's very, um, it makes me feel great that I'm part of this with all of you. Now, I'm going to be sharing my screen because I have a PowerPoint. So here we go. Do you guys see my screen? Yes, great. Okay, I kind of tweaked the title a bit of the paper. It's still addressing very similar topics. It's Education on Anti-Semitism, Problems and Solutions. So I'd like to begin by tracing various points that have led me to this presentation, which is about education within the Jewish American community on anti-Semitism. A few things. First, K through 12 Jewish education and community day schools shoehorn the study of anti-Semitism into Holocaust studies. In my research of both working with the schools and studying material from schools, I have yet to come across a high school that teaches the history of anti-Semitism or contemporary anti-Semitism outside of Holocaust programming. Now, the consequence of this decades-long education is that the Holocaust has become a surrogate for anti-Semitism. Now, of course, it depends on the school and the teacher, but here are some cursory observations of the consequences of this. And my apologies for simplifying it, but here it goes. Students now know that swastikas are bad, Nazi symbols are bad, anti-Semitism is a form of scapegoating, Nazis dehumanized Jews by comparing them to rats, racist ideology fueled the Holocaust, Nazis killed Jews for having the wrong blood, and Jews were marked with the yellow Star of David. The effects of this are twofold. One, not preparing people to identify post-Holocaust manifestations of anti-Semitism, and two, treating Kristallnacht, and here I want to just pause on an example I'm about to show you, of treating Kristallnacht not as a particular historic event, but lessons learned. In a major Jewish day school in Los Angeles, there was a project. The project was Kristallnacht, we will not be silenced in, ... and the students had to fill in what will they not be silenced, what will they not be silenced in the face of because of Kristallnacht. Here are examples. We will not be silent in the face of rape culture, sexism, racism, rape, racism, hate, anti-Semitism, homophobia, environmental degradation, gun violence, any hate, okay? Likewise, I've now taught to many middle school and high schools, and when I come and speak, I ask students, when would you date anti-Semitism in the history of the world? And the answer I get is the Holocaust. The perpetuation of Nazi ideology as the genesis of anti-Semitism in American education continues to occur within programming by such national institutions of civil rights, such as the ADL, the Shoah Foundation, and the Museum of Tolerance. Take, for example, the 2021 unit for teachers who wish to teach about the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe today. In scaffolding anti-Semitism, architects of this unit identify the following manifestations of this: swastikas, Nazi symbols, throwing a penny at a Jewish person, thinking all Jews are rich and or cheap, assaulting a Jewish person, jokes about the Holocaust. Well, you can read, denying housing for Jewish families, thinking Jewish people have horns, etc. In higher education, Holocaust studies itself has been universalized, and now fields such as comparative genocide studies or genocide studies have taken over. And the universalization of anti-Semitism, which has the consequence of labeling this specific form of hatred as a form of racism, really echoes to me Soviet universalization of the Holocaust. Now, I want to address the tension between universalism and particularism that guides Jewish self-awareness, and I would like to also comment has even proliferated at our conference what I have observed as even discomfort with the current state of Israel as being an ethno-religious sovereign state. To sum up, Jewish self-awareness begins with the diaspora, and more specifically with Christianity and the concept of religious identity in Europe. Sometimes this tension was due to external forces, as in the case of the emancipation of Jews in France, who were denied nothing as individuals, but everything as a nation. And other times, this tension between universalism and particularism was self-imposed, as in the case of the 1885 Pittsburgh Platform, where Jewish immigrants to the United States eschewed national identity and therefore Palestine as a national homeland. The multi-generational effects of the Pittsburgh Platform evince an American Jewish identity rooted in religious minority. So in the United States, if you look at, for instance, the ADL and the FBI reporting on hate crimes, anti-Semitism manifests in hate crimes against a religious minority. This limited conceptualization, I argue, of anti-Semitism proved difficult for Jewish students experiencing the new form of anti-Semitism on campus, known as anti-Zionism, to make the case for anti-Semitism. Another important flashpoint for me to pause on was the rise of a new anti-Semitism directed at Israel and Zionists. Of course, for Russian-speaking Jews, this was not a new phenomenon. This, specifically the slander that Zionism is racism and that Israel is an imperialist or Nazi entity. American Jews are feeling what Soviet Jews felt in the late 60s and all throughout the Soviet regime. Now, in terms of America, I date the rise of this new anti-Semitism, which took hold on college campuses to 2000, 2001, with the Second Intifada, 9/11, the Durban Conference. And the new anti-Semitism has been well documented by Amcha. So here we come to the question of, the next question. College administrators, teachers, professors, Jewish institutions have come late to identify this form of Jew hatred. Why? Why is this the case? Now, there are several reasons, but for our purposes, and because I'm focusing on education, my main argument is that this type of Jewish education that I spoke of earlier, which shoehorns anti-Semitism into that of racism and Nazism, has not prepared students to properly identify anti-Semitism. Allow me to be more specific. A student who has gone through a robust Jewish day school education would not be able to recognize these forms of anti-Semitism. They do not know what blood libel is. I've asked. I taught classes at UCLA on Jewish history, and in my lectures, when I would reference blood libel or protocols of the Elders of Zion, students did not know what that was. This leads me to diagnosing the problem. Three major problems, really. The lack of proper education, as I say, and why Holocaust education has not helped, and in some cases may even have failed or fueled anti-Semitism. The second is a framework for understanding anti-Semitism really dictates how you treat anti-Semitism. And the third is this discomfort with particularism, with treating anti-Semitism as a universal concept, bigotry, anti-bullying campaigns, say no to hate, racism. And I'm very well aware that the title of this conference is Anti-Semitism in Today's America, but I'd be neglectful to not reference the Soviet experience. Namely, I'd like to take a look at how anti-Semitism was dealt with by the nascent Soviet state. I want to play a short video of Vladimir Lenin giving a speech in 1919 where he talks about how terrible anti-Semitism is. Now, just to give you a little bit of background, anti-Semitism between 1920 and 1928 in Soviet Union was elevated to a state crime, meaning if you had said to a person, a Jewish person on the street, kaik or Žid, you could have faced jail time. That's how serious the Soviets took anti-Semitism. But did they, is the question. So I'd love to take a look at this short 2-minute speech. And here it goes. Excuse me. Are you guys seeing this? Yes?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Называется распространение вражды к евреям. Когда проклятая царская монархия доживала свое последнее время, она старалась натравить темных рабочих и крестьян на евреев. Царская полиция в союзе с помещиками и капиталистами устраивала еврейские погромы. Ненависть измученных нуждой рабочих и крестьян помещики и капиталисты старались направить на евреев. И в других странах приходится видеть нередко, что капиталисты разжигают вражду к евреям, чтобы засорить глаза рабочих, чтобы отвлечь их взоры от настоящего врага трудящихся, от капитала. Вражда к евреям держится прочно только там, где кабала помещиков и капиталистов создала беспросветную темноту рабочих и крестьян. Только совсем темные, совсем забитые люди могут верить лжи и клевете, распространяемой против евреев. Это остатки старого, крепостного времени, когда попы заставляли сжигать еретиков на кострах, когда существовало рабство.
I think we get the point here. He keeps on speaking about, well, here's the point. Okay, if we had to synthesize Lenin's speech into an official statement, if Vladimir Lenin was the CEO of the ADL, this would be the official statement put out. Anti-Semitism is a byproduct of the evil capitalist and Tsarist regime. To fight anti-Semitism is to fight for workers and the proletariat, to jettison the benighted feudal and capitalist regime. To allow anti-Semitism to flourish is to allow backward feudal structures to prosper. So in Lenin's framing the problem of anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism becomes a tool to fight the greater evil, and that is capitalism, feudalism, monarchy, and religion, which really is an important, I bring this to your attention because I think it's very important in how people address anti-Semitism. So let's now take a look at the case in 2020 of student Rose Ritch at USC. She resigned from student government position because of intense harassment due to her Zionist identity. US President Carol Folt issued a statement, a letter in which she decried anti-Semitism and racism. The solution, a robust educational program run by the USC Shoah Foundation's a new educational initiative called Stronger Than Hate. Now, keeping in mind Lenin's framework for anti-Semitism, I would like to examine the conceptualization of anti-Semitism via the program. Let's take a look at a statement from the USC Shoah Foundation from 2020, decrying anti-Semitism. We are here to build alliances across difference, counter hatred, and foster a culture of anti-racism. Against growing waves of anti-Black racism and hatred, we stand ready to act and ask you to join. Recent events are clear. Amid a rise in violent anti-Semitism in the wake of the deadly white nationalist rally in August in Charlottesville, we launched an initiative that draws on the power of testimony to help students counter systems of hate and oppression. In studying the genesis of Stronger Than Hate, as well as reading the background document, Becoming Stronger Than Hate, the architects of this program proclaim that the genesis of this educational initiative is to be found in the white nationalist rally. Like in Lenin's speech on anti-Semitism, for the architects of Stronger Than Hate, anti-Semitism is a byproduct of white nationalism, the greater evil, and must be combated in order to combat the even greater evil of racism and white supremacy. Okay, but important questions surface. Was Rose Ritch a victim of racism and white nationalism? How would Stronger Than Hate disentangle the faulty and dangerous connection between Zionism and racism? To wit, this program will not triage the problem of this new anti-Semitism, but most likely contribute to fostering the continued misrepresentation of anti-Semitism as racism. Now, why do I believe is it wrong to conflate anti-Semitism with racism? I believe that anti-Semitism has 6 leading features or tropes or accusations. It is in dehumanization. It's that one in which we overlap with racism the most. However, anti-Semitism likewise views Jews as superhuman, as dominating the world, Jewish power, deicide, killing Christ, that's a huge sin accusation, right? And Jewish metaphysical power, such as hypnotizing the world. It may sound simple, what I'm about to say, but my conclusion is that if you conflate anti-Semitism and racism, you are missing about 80% of the unique features of anti-Semitism. More to the point, in the case of Rose Ritch, how would the currently anti-racist framework disentangle, once again, this slander between Zionism and racism? In combing through the educational material and resources of this program, what I have found are testimonies by Jews who encounter anti-Semitism, and mostly Holocaust survivors. But what is glaringly missing is a structural presentation of anti-Semitism. Now, I'd like to turn briefly to a gallery of educational programming on anti-Semitism that exists within major institutions. Here I'm focusing on ADL, the Shoah Foundation, and the Museum of Tolerance. I already spoke about a unit for high school students called On the Rise, Anti-Semitism in Europe, where these are the features. I mean, glaringly missing is blood libel, which I argue is probably another one of the most dangerous features of anti-Semitism, again, today, resurfacing today. All right, let's take a look at two programs for middle school and high school students at the ADL. One is called No Place for Hate, and the other is called Words to Action. So I personally participated in the No Place for Hate workshop, utilizing what they call the pyramid of hate. Facilitators walk students through a series of biased attitudes, acts of bias, discrimination, and of course, violent crime motivated by hate. The methodology here is to pair up students and ask them to come up with examples from each category of hate. Unfortunately, in this program, anti-Semitism is presented as racism, and as such, there are no examples of this new anti-Semitism. In terms of educational resources for the Museum of Tolerance, I'm aware that they are currently working on a new exhibit and educational material to deal with this new form of Jew hatred. However, currently what I have found are 4 major programs called Youth Social Justice Institute, Tools for Tolerance for Teens, Combat Hate, Space to Talk About Racism. I'd like to address now a bigger problem with anti-racist education in the United States. The anti-racist education applies the following lens to the world, whether it's history, sociology, civilization, and that is one of power and powerlessness. Whether it is current or not to our topic today, what is very relevant is that this lens positions Israel, Zionism, and Zionists in the powerful camp, and in this way continues the age-old trend of viewing Jews as violators. And this is something I think is very important to kind of zoom out and take a look at how anti-Semites position themselves. So right in the Middle Ages, we had Judeophobia with the Jews are violators of Christian tenets. In the modern age with Darwin and new science, Jews were violators of the purity of race. Anti-Zionism, the new form, right, is Jews are violators, now they call them Zionists, of human rights, because Israel is in the position of power right now, right? You're hearing Jews are privileged in the American context. So I really have my suspicions that any program of anti-racism could and would honestly deal with this final form of hatred. And so I'd like to conclude by offering a few solutions. First, I'd like to propose that when teaching, we do not refer to Jew hatred as anti-Semitism or even anti-Zionism. These terms were created by anti-Semites in order to peddle socially acceptable forms of Jew hatred. Second, while I believe definitions are important and most definitely for legal cases, because as is well known, Jew hatred mutates, to calcify a definition on Jew hatred would prove difficult for future advocates, leaders, policymakers, educators, etc. And finally, I have been using these 6 accusations referenced earlier. And I'd like to conclude with this case study. So in Los Angeles, in the year 2019, there was a ginormous mural in downtown LA, and somebody drove by it and took a picture, and it appeared in many WhatsApp groups. And somebody reached out to me and asked me if I could reach out to the owner of the building and ask him to take it down. So I called the owner of the building. And the first question he asked me when I said that this is very anti-Semitic, he said, "Why is this anti-Semitic?" And I paused because to me it was so obvious. And I use this when I teach students. I ask them, can you make the case, can you articulate here in this image why this is anti-Semitic? And I walk them through these 6 accusations. And what we see here is dual loyalty, the idea that the Jews, so this is the American flag, shroud, this Grim Reaper or skeleton of death, is wearing this American flag dispersed in between our Magen Davids and American stars of the stars of the flag. This baby right here, the blood libel, the demonization, world domination, that here the Jew is behind American actions. But it was an important learning moment, and it's an important moment that I tell students when I talk to them. When you articulate that something is anti-Semitism, you got to know why. You got to be able to explain. And unfortunately, I do not think that a person who has gone through an ADL unit wherein there's no Nazi symbols here, there's no swastikas, nobody's throwing pennies at Jews here, there's no racism here really. And so many times students cannot articulate it. They just say it's bad. Well, it's bad. It looks bad. I'm like, that's not good enough. You can't just say that's bad. You have to articulate it. The story behind this mural, ladies and gentlemen, is that this was created by a street artist in Los Angeles who visited Gaza, and he met with Hamas operatives. And this is actually this was called 9/11. This is actually his rendition of 9/11. On the bottom here, I know you can't see it, but there are buildings and twin towers. I don't know why it crops it this way, but it's even worse than just plain, it's conspiratorial, just like we know all anti-Semitism really is. And so I leave you with this image, and I leave you to think about, are we really preparing our youth to identify anti-Semitism? And I understand that many people on this in this conference also, we're going to hear about definitions. And my students, when I speak to them, they definitely know about IRA, the 3D test developed by Natan Sharansky. But in teaching anti-Semitism, my methodology is I really boil it down to these 6 accusations, because no matter which century you look at, these accusations proliferate. And I understand that my population that I deal with are mostly high school students, but then they go to college. And so a lot of them will be your students. And so it's a very serious matter. And a lot of people think, well, they're just in college, then they go into the world, but they go into the world with these ideas, and then they become policymakers and teachers. And they may be, writing important laws. So that's where I'd like to conclude today, and I thank you.